Alright, so part 3 of this day's learning. Daily schedule, we'll be reading from this book, which obviously you guys don't have a copy of. It's just one of my texts for this course. So I'm going to be reading What the Hero Is in Myth first, and then I'm going to be reading a little tidbit about Perseus, who is a Greek mythology figure. Or hero, if you will. So you'll get an idea of what the hero is in myth and how he kind of goes on his own hero's journey. It's just a short tidbit, so is this hero in myth, so this video shouldn't be super long. I'm just going to read both of these, and then you can go about your day and working on picking a text in these links for your Unit 2 project. Okay? So the hero in myth. One of the important threads in all mythologies is the story of the hero, the mighty person who has a series of challenging adventures. All these myths have many elements in common. Scholars have divided the path of the hero into 3 sections. So these are the 3 sections, kind of which those parts that we already went over are separated into, according to a lot of scholars. Separation, initiation, and return. So these 3 sections are a kind of reflection of life. They resemble the rites of passage, especially the rites preparing young people for adulthood. Rites being not R-I-G-H-T-S, but the rites of passage such as R-I-T-E-S. There's English language, sorry guys. In the typical hero myth, the leading character is required to go out into the world to face many challenges, often supernatural. He bravely ventures forth and meets many difficult antagonists. He vanquishes all and returns home with new powers to help his fellows. This theme appears in many mythologies. One of the earliest examples is the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh. This mighty hero is challenged to fight a supernatural warrior in Enkidu. He overcomes Enkidu and becomes his friend. He goes on to fight all kinds of monsters and survive many dangers. He eventually returns with new knowledge, sadder but wiser. This tale, already 5,000 years old, has counterparts in myths of other lands. In many ways, Gilgamesh resembles Beowulf, a hero of Anglo-Saxons who overran England more than 1,000 years ago. If you guys aren't familiar with Beowulf, I think you should have read it already. It is something that you can look into for the hero's journey. I didn't put it in the links just because it's a longer story, but you can use it if you've read it before. Like Gilgamesh, Beowulf fights monsters and overcomes terrible dangers. Similarly, both Odysseus and Aeneas face terrible dangers on their travels to their goals. Odysseus at last comes home to Ithaca. Aeneas at last ends his travels to found Rome. Most mythologies have similar myths of great heroes on great quests. These include the Eskimo raven, King Arthur of ancient Britain, Gautama Buddha of Nepal and India, Lemminkainen of Finland, Siegfried of Germany, Rama of India, and Roland of medieval France. The myth of the hero is alive and well, with many counterparts today. Characters like Superman, Conan, James Bond, 007, and Indiana Jones are modern versions of the indomitable hero. Legendary Western heroes, played by actors like John Wayne and Gary Cooper, keep alive the mythology of the American West. All these characters face challenges that would overwhelm an ordinary person. They conquer evil and emerge triumphant after facing impossible odds. The selections that follow trace the fortunes of 5 Greek heroes. All of them are larger than life. All face challenges and prevail. Sometimes the final chapter of their lives is tragic, but their magnificent achievements live on. So we're going to just go through one of those 5, which is Perseus, and then we will be done with today's video, part 3. So Perseus. When Danae, daughter of the king of Argos, bore Jupiter a son, she was banished from her native land by her father. In Seriphus, their country of exile, Danae and her son Perseus were at first treated with kindness. But when Perseus was grown to manhood, the king of Seriphus fell in love with Danae, and wishing to get Perseus out of the way, gave him a seemingly impossible task. Perseus's task was to conquer the Gorgon Medusa, a terrible monster that had laid waste much of the country. Medusa had a weapon, her face, that man could not combat. Her face was so horrible that it turned into stone anyone who looked at her. Her hair was composed of hissing serpents. All around her were the petrified bodies of those who had looked upon her. Perseus started out on the hopeless quest. Fortunately, he obtained help from Minerva and Mercury. So you'll notice some of these are actually, this is the Roman myth of Perseus, because Jupiter, for instance, and Minerva and Mercury, those are the Roman names for some of the gods that you might be familiar with. For instance, Jupiter is the Roman version of Poseidon. And then Mercury is the Roman version of Hermes, I believe. And then Minerva, I don't know. Let me check. I forget. Okay, just like I thought, Minerva is actually the Roman version of the Greek goddess Athena, the goddess of wisdom. So anyway, let's see. Perseus started out on the hopeless quest. Fortunately, he obtained some help from Minerva and Mercury. Minerva lent him her bright shield, Mercury his knife. He first came to the cave of three sisters, old hags who had but a single eye and a single tooth among them. These they passed from one to another at need. Perseus bided his time, and at a favorable moment snatched both the eye and the tooth as they were being passed from one of them to another. As the price of their restoration, he demanded that the sisters guide him to the helmet of Pluto, which makes its wearer invisible. Pluto being Hades. Pluto is the Roman version of Hades, which makes its wearer invisible. He also requested the winged shoes and pouch of Mercury, who again we said is Hermes. These they secured for him. Fully equipped at last, he set off to meet the monster herself. Advancing unseen, he held up Minerva's bright shield as a mirror, thus avoiding a direct look at the monster and looking instead at her reflection on the shield. He beheaded her with one quick slash of Mercury's knife. He put the hideous trophy in his pouch, and fastening the winged sandals, flew like a bird in the direction of Seriphus, the land of the tyrant king. The death of Medusa had two different results. From her blood sprang two quite opposite mythical characters, Pegasus and Chrysaor. Pegasus was the famous winged horse who helped his master Bellerophon conquer the Chimera, a fire-breathing monster. Pegasus is often pictured on advertising, Pegasus being the winged horse. Chrysaor became the father of Geryon, a monster who appears in the labors of Hercules. Thus do various myths tie together. As for Perseus, his great adventure was by no means ended. On his way, he passed over the country of the Ethiopians. It seemed that Cassiopeia, wife of King Cepheus, had offended the sea nymphs by her excessive vanity, and they in turn had sent a sea monster to ravage the coasts. To appease the nymphs, Cepheus had agreed to sacrifice his daughter Andromeda to the monster. Accordingly, she was chained to a rock on the shore to await her doom. Flying high above the land, Perseus saw the unfortunate maiden and rushed down to rescue her. At first, Andromeda refused to discuss her plight, but finally she explained how she had come to be chained to the rock for a sacrifice. As she finished speaking, a horrible sound announced the arrival of the sea monster. Perseus rushed to the attack, plunging his sword again and again into the furious beast. Finally, he dealt a death blow, and the monster sank into the sea. As a reward for his bravery, Perseus demanded Andromeda as his bride. To this request, her parents willingly consented. While the wedding banquet was taking place, a former suitor of Andromeda arrived to claim her as his own. The king pointed out that the suitor had lost all claim by his obvious reluctance to battle with the sea monster to save her. But the suitor refused to yield. Since he had brought with him a host of warriors, he decided to settle the matter by force of arms. The newcomers attacked the wedding party, and soon, because of their superior numbers, were in a fair way of gaining victory. When Perseus saw this, he took the head of Medusa out of his pouch and held it up before the attackers. All motion ceased. The attackers became rooted to the spot, stone monuments to treachery. Returning to the land of the tyrant king to rescue his mother, Perseus used the Gorgon's head once more. After he had turned his enemies into stone, he returned the knife, the shoes, and the shield to Mercury and Minerva. Medusa's head he presented to Minerva. Ever afterward, she bore the head upon her shield to recall the great deeds of Perseus. So, that is an example of one hero's journey, which kind of covers a lot of the parts that we already discussed. If we read it in the full version, it would cover them even better, but that is more of a nice little summary that still gets the main points across and gives you an idea in actual literature what the hero's journey might look like, especially in mythological form, which this is the Roman version. Like I said before, they're the Romans' gods' names. We might, as we go along, discuss how Greek and Roman mythology figures are usually similar figures, but have different names, except for a couple of them have the same names. As we're reading other mythological examples. Also, while we go through our daily words, sometimes like Panic, the god of Pan, comes up. So God's names do come up sometimes. So that is the end of this part, or this day. So make sure you pick one of the stories from these links or come up with another idea, and then make sure you, tomorrow, you email me your project proposal, which you'll see in tomorrow's video, and let me know which one you have decided on and what your projects will be. Remember, it has to be a different creative project than the last time you did it. Each one has to be different. So make sure you're picking a different section of that little chart that I gave you guys. You'll see it in Google Classroom as well. So if you go into Google Classroom, go into the final project, you'll see the myth reflection expectations, and then one of the docs is the student options. Remember, you can only do one of each of these, and then your last project is a choice that you pick from these, but it has to be different than, let's say if you're doing two performances, one can be a speech, but then the second one can't be a speech. It has to be something else in that little section. So make sure you're picking different ones this time, okay? Than what you did for your first unit project. Alright, so we'll talk more about submitting that to me later, but for right now, this is the end of the video, so have a good day. Bye.